report has come out this morning that Damian Lillard plans to request a trade from the Portland Trail Blazers. It's possible, and it seems even more so possible now, that Damian Lillard will be traded from the Portland Trail Blazers this summer. We've heard lots of talks about a Damian Lillard trade, lots of talks about a CJ McCollum trade, lots of talks about a lot of movement in Portland this summer. Already Terry Stotts has been fired. There's a lot of free agency and trade movement that is expected. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video, is what is going to happen with Portland this offseason, what could potentially happen as far as trades go, as far as free agency goes, potential Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum trades, and the fallout and repercussions of one or both of them being dealt, and just what can be expected from Portland in general, and what is going to be arguably the most important offseason for their future in a long time, as they could finally be moving past the Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum era and into a bit more of an unknown, potentially retooling or rebuilding era, as they move past one of or both of their star backcourt players. With that being said, let's just get right into it. And so I will get into talking about the repercussions of a Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum trade or trades later on in this video. But first off, I just want to talk about their free agency as a whole for them this offseason, and honestly, just the large turnover they could have on this team from how they ended solely via free agency, regardless of what happens to them via trade this summer. Their potential free agents range from Norman Powell, who has a player option who he will definitely opt out of, Derrick Jones Jr., who they signed on the mid-level exception last year, who also has a player option for this summer. Remains to be seen what he does with that. Zach Collins, Enes Kanter, Carmelo Anthony, and Harry Giles are also all free agents. Harry Giles didn't play a ton, but nonetheless, he's there. Enes Kanter's the backup center. Melo's their most valuable bench piece, who's heavily rumored to leave and potentially go to a better team. And fair enough, at the age of 37, is heavily rumored to potentially go to the Lakers. And then Zach Collins, of course, their former first-round pick, has just struggled to stay healthy, but could still be a valuable piece if he can stay healthy. And so that in itself is 5 rotational players that Portland could potentially lose via free agency this summer. That's not mentioning any trade. Norman Powell is most definitely going to opt out. Derrick Jones Jr. still remains to be seen. Melo, I don't expect to return, and his Kanter just remains to be seen on what you think, and if you even want to bring him back, due to the fact that he's just not beneficial to you in the playoffs because he just gets put in the pick and roll and he cannot defend it. That's the problem. Enes Kanter was historically one of the worst players defensively in NBA history at defending the center position, specifically in the pick and roll and not on the perimeter, and that's just something that you need to be able to do in today's NBA. But regardless, of course, Norman Powell, they traded away Gary Trent and a first-round pick, I believe, to acquire... No, pardon me. Gary Trent and Rodney Hood. Neither first-round pick didn't seem right. I should know that. I am a Raptors fan. But it was a fair price to give up for Norman Powell on a rental. And now, of course, he is going to opt out of that deal. And if Damian Lillard and or CJ McCollum get traded and they don't get significant immediate impact return, then I find it hard to imagine that Norman Powell is going to want to stay in Portland. He's been on a fairly competitive team for most of his career. Early days in Toronto weren't as competitive, but it's still been a competitive team the whole time. He doesn't know playing on a bad team in the NBA, and I doubt he's going to want to start that as he enters free agency this summer. And so I find it hard to imagine if Portland look like they're going to have a tough rebuilding season next year that he's going to want to be a part of it, even if they do give him handsome money. And so he's likely out the door. There's going to be a lot of change in Portland regardless. Now, Norman Powell's a weird fit. It does make more sense if CJ gets traded, Norman Powell gets brought back. He plays the 2 because Norman Powell at the 3, he can do it, but it's a weird fit. It didn't look good for Portland. The defense was already bad, and some people said, oh, they brought in Norman Powell. It improves their defense. Me as a Toronto Raptors fan doesn't even agree with that statement at all. I don't even think that you can agree with that statement because, one, I think Gary Trent Jr. is already a better defender than Norman Powell, although that just kind of depends on the day for Powell because he can be a good defender, he can be a bad defender. But also, this trade for Portland meant that Derrick Jones Jr. got pushed out of the starting lineup and played significantly less minutes, who was, outside of Robert Covington, one of their only other good defenders on the team who played consistent minutes. And him getting less minutes than the team just meant their defense got worse as a whole. It just wasn't a good fit for Portland. That being said, Powell's probably going to leave. They just gave up a very good young player in Gary Trent Jr. to get him. And now they're not going to have anything to show for it anymore, most likely, unless they can retain him. And let's move on to Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, because that's, of course, the big topic of Portland's offseason. I'm not going to discuss potential trades, mock trades, or anything like that within this video. If I do at some point, that will be in a video later down the line. But I just kind of talk about what I think is going to happen and the repercussions of what could happen based on what decisions are made in Portland this summer. So first off, I find it hard to imagine that Damian Lillard is going to outright ask for a trade. However, I wouldn't be shocked if he does get moved this summer. Of course, if you're Portland, you would much prefer trade CJ, try and retool, and still keep Damian Lillard. But I think at this point, he's 31. He wants to win. He's just now entering his new big contract in this upcoming season, guaranteed at $227 million. But he's 31 now. He's going to want to win. He's been loyal to Portland for his whole career, but it's time for him to move now and try and get a title. With that being said, let's play the card that Damian Lillard does get traded. In a Damian Lillard trade, they are going to want and will most likely get a significant piece back via a current player in the league, along with, of course, a lot of picks. It's not going to be just a couple of role players and some picks like some people have thrown around in some Ben Simmons or Damian Lillard mock trades. That doesn't work. You need to have a player of value. Someone like a Karis LeVert that was used in the James Harden trade. This is the people see the James Harden trade and see a bunch of firsts and Victor Oladipo, who was an expiring, who was injured, and is like, oh, you can get him for nothing. But no, LeVert and Allen were also supposed to go to Houston. So let's not forget that. So Portland aren't going to get just a bunch of future assets for any Damian Lillard trade. They're going to get some current assets back that can help them win now. It's just obviously not going to be at the level of impact of Damian Lillard. Now, based on the value of those players and how impactful they are immediately, it's probably going to determine what Portland want to do moving forward. How young are those current assets and how many firsts do they have and how beneficial could those firsts be? Because if they have some players that are 22, 24, 25, fairly young, maybe not in win now mode yet, maybe CJ McCollum doesn't fit the timeline anymore, and maybe you want to trade him as well and try and get some assets back for him that fit the timeline a bit better for the new players you acquire in a Damian Lillard trade. Maybe you also look to trade Robert Covington at that point and try and get some value back for him after you just gave up a couple of firsts to get him last offseason. It would be a bit unfortunate, but maybe you try and get a bit of value back for him as he just won't fit the timeline anymore and he only has a year left on his contract. So that's some of the things you could look and see Portland do if Damian Lillard does get dealt. I think trading CJ would definitely make sense depending on the guys you get back. Now, if you get some players that are fairly impactful, that are 27, 28, 29, and are kind of in that same age bracket as CJ McCollum, then sure, fair enough, run it back, retool. You're probably not that great of a team, but you could probably still try and be a playoff team. You try and bring back Norman Powell, potentially, have a backcourt of McCollum and Powell, which lacks a true point guard, and I would not recommend, but you could do it, depending on what other pieces they get back, and they could run it back, no doubt, but they're definitely not a great team at that point by any stretch. So, I think Portland are probably in a scenario now where it's tough because they don't have that many current future assets in the team. Like, Nazir Little's a fine player and was really good in high school, but hasn't really developed at that same rate and adjusted to the higher levels in college or in the NBA yet. Anthony Simons has shown potential, but he's fine, nothing special. And outside of that, they don't really have that many promising or any bit promising young talents on the team. And that's a concern. That is a concern for a team that is about to enter a retool or a rebuild. And so the direction that they go really has to depend on what they get back for Damian Lillard. If it's a bunch of picks and nothing that they can really compete with right now, then they need to get rid of CJ, focus on the future, and try and start acquiring those future assets, rebuilding, acquiring some first-round picks that you can use in some trade packages down the road, or via the draft to acquire some young, good talent in the next couple of years. And if they can get some players that are win now and they still think they can field a competitive team with CJ, whoever they bring back, and they can bring back Norman Powell, that's fine too. But I think the expectation has to be that Portland are not going to be as good as they were the last few years in this upcoming season, regardless of a Damian Lillard or a CJ McCollum trade. I don't think they're going to improve or get equal value from an immediate standpoint of impact on this team. It's going to be a retool. There might be a couple of years if they do rebuild, and it's going to take a bit longer to go. But I would advocate personally Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and probably Robert Covington to all get dealt. Start to change the age timeline of your team a little bit and try and start building towards the future, towards a different and better era of Portland Trailblazers basketball. There's no doubt that the Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum era has been good. It's been fun. They've been one of the best backcourts in the league in their tenure together in Portland. But this group just doesn't work for winning. It has not been a successful group of players as far as being able to win a title. They got to a Western Conference Finals. I think that's as good as they're ever going to get. I'm surprised they even got that far, as it is as good as the Western Conference is. That's no knock on Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. There's just so much talent in the West that this team is just not built to the level of some of the other teams out West. So I think it's a retooling summer for Portland. That's what I certainly would advocate for. But let me know what you guys think Portland should do in this offseason. What is going to be a very pivotal and decisive offseason for Portland as they start to build past the Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum era. With that being said, if you guys did enjoy the video, feel free to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will be continuing off-season preview videos like this for every team in the NBA as we approach the NBA draft. And we'll be keeping you updated on all draft and free agency news as we head into the most fun part of the NBA off-season calendar. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.